Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, we've got 72-hour rainfall amounts along the North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, south central Alaska into the Copper River Basin, and stands out fairly well there. Cordova seeing 4 1/3 to 7 3/4 inches of rain during that 72-hour rainfall total. 24-hour totals there range from 2.5 to 4.5 inches. Valdez, last 3 days, picking up about 2.5 inches of rain. And in the Copper River Basin, in the last 24 hours, Gulkana's picked up 1.5 inches. Otherwise, you can see about 2.5 inches falling. I believe that's at Alyeska there in just Turnagain Arm, and Anchorage up to 1 inch. And a little over 1 inch up into the Matanuska Valley there. Willow anywhere from 1.5 inches to just under 2 inches. And then less amounts, mostly under 1 inch for the Kenai Peninsula area. And also Yakutat, which didn't make the chart there. So we got a separate graphic for them since yesterday. The airport at Yakutat's picked up 2 2/3 inches of rain. And rain will continue through the week and into the weekend the way it looks right now, with possibly heavy at times possible. And from there, that rainfall has kept the flood watch alive and well there over the Copper River Basin and the Valdez-Cordova area through tonight, through late tonight, which is about 4 a.m. Thursday morning. And if there hasn't been any flooding by then there probably won't be. But it's out for the potential for possible flooding to occur due to the recent heavy rains. And then out to the west there's coastal or high surf advisories out for the St. Lawrence Island area, Yukon Delta coast, coastal Norton Sound, on up to the Bering Strait coast, up to Shishmaref, and then along the northwest coast, Kivalina to Point Hope. And from there, looking at this a little more in detail, first for the St. Lawrence Island area, Bering Strait coast, and the Yukon Delta area, southern Seward Peninsula, eastern Norton Sound. That's out from midnight tonight until noon Thursday, and that's for high surf. And again, like yesterday, expecting waves will wash to the top of the beach. Beach erosion may occur, or probably will occur, especially on south-facing shorelines, but flooding not expected, with south winds 25 to 40 miles an hour. And the other one is out, this one's out a little longer now for the Chukchi coast. That's out from 10 a.m. today, currently out now, until 4 p.m. tomorrow. And again, for high surf, and the same sort of situation. Waves washing to the top of the beach could cause minor beach erosion, but flooding not expected, with south winds 20, maybe gusts to 40 miles an hour in those areas. And moving on, looking at the 24-hour peak wind gusts, Erickson Air Force Base at Shemya, they had a peak wind gust of 53 miles per hour, as did a couple of stations there on Adak Island, also reporting 53 mile per hour wind gusts. St. George Island, 48 miles an hour, and St. Paul about 44 miles an hour, with Atka seeing 40 mile an hour wind gusts, and Nikolsky 36 miles an hour, Kipnuk about 26. But Cape Newenham and Tin City both recorded wind gusts of 47 miles per hour so far today. And also today, the last full day of summer. Summer continues into tomorrow, but the last full day is today. Autumn begins tomorrow at 5:04 p.m., and then summer will be just a memory. And for satellite imagery, you can see that continued south to north flow of moisture coming up across the eastern Pacific into the North Gulf Coast, Copper River Basin areas, bringing the heavy rains in. That extended westward across at least to eastern Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula today, into the Matanuska and Susitna Valley, northward into the interior. North of the Alaska Range, amounts are a lot lighter. And some of that spilling into the northern panhandle, but that area is having a tough time moving east, with a persistent ridge of high pressure covering the southern panhandle. Again, temperatures this afternoon, upper 60s, some cases lower 70s. Shoulder Cove, I believe, was 74 degrees at about 2 p.m. this afternoon, with Heidelberg sitting at 68 and close to 70 over at Stewart. And so that band of moisture having a tough time pushing eastward there, and the inland incoming one into the west coast there, that doesn't have particularly heavy amounts of rain with it at all, just kind of light rain and the gusty winds, and being pushed eastward by a pretty good westerly jet that's going to eventually shove things to the east, and that ridge will break down over the panhandle, push it more into western Canada, and eventually bring some rain all the way down to Dixon Entrance there over the next couple of days. On the chart today, you can see weak low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, and Cook Inlet, Anchorage, Chugach, right on the western edge of that precipitation field there, kind of oscillating east and west with waves rippling northward. First trough weakening, bringing some rain into Sitka today, and up over the northern panhandle, light rain, heavier toward Icy Bay, Dry Bay, Yakutat, and of course the precipitation we saw for Cordova, Valdez into the Copper River Basin. Lighter amounts of rain there with that system coming into the west coast there with the winds kicking up, as I mentioned, anywhere from 30 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts. The higher gusts in the exposed locations, Cape Romanzoff, Cape Newenham, Tin City, those areas. Then it turns westerly and dries out back to the west there. And tonight, that front doesn't make much eastward headway, begins to really weaken, pushes south of the Aleutians, and you can see the gradient kind of stretching out there with the low center hanging back just off the Russian coast. Stays pretty breezy, though, for the Bering Strait coast, northwest interior areas. And a front, weak front, pushes into the northern panhandle, but rain can't get much south of Port Alexander or probably Wrangell or Petersburg. Could see some, but south of there, just an increase in the clouds. Periods of rain for the North Gulf Coast should be lighter later tonight than it has been. With rain and snow, looks like snowfall levels about 2,500 feet or so over the southeast interior Alaska range, eastern Alaska range, possibly down into the Chugach Mountains as well. And for the day on Thursday, tomorrow, that front just washes out into a trough there and hangs back along the west coast. Kind of a split in the wind flow there, strong westerlies coming across the Bering Sea. Then you can see it kind of branches off to the southeast, and a weaker flow from south to north there across Norton Sound, the Seward Peninsula. So that just stretching that front to pieces, weakening it with little eastward progress. So it'll be a little more showery and drier over south central Alaska today, at least the eastern part, but still look for periods of rain along the North Gulf Coast, especially late in the day with that warm front spreading moisture back to the north, and showers possible over the southern panhandle, periods of light rain up to the north there. And central interior, basically dry rain or snow showers either side there over toward the eastern interior, maybe the central Arctic coast. And for the day on Friday, that low center drops to just southwest of Nunivak Island. Gusty winds around that out over the west central Bering Sea, sweeping down into the eastern Aleutians. And the front pushes rain now. Looks like moderate amounts over the northern panhandle, and rain should reach all the way down to the Queen Charlotte Islands. Rain and snow depending on the elevation, areas of or showers over the interior. And for lows tonight, upper 40s to near 50 for the panhandle, otherwise mid-30s, mid to upper 30s, lower 40s down along the coast, Kenai Peninsula, Bristol Bay area, Kodiak. Highs tomorrow in the upper 40s to lower 50s over the inland areas, Kodiak up to the 55. Finally, cooler down over the southern panhandle, highs mid to upper 50s, lower to mid 50s to the north, and highs or lows the following morning. Again, 30s over the inland areas, lower 40s for the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, mid to upper 40s for the panhandle. Highs in the 50s southeast coast and upper 40s to mid 50s elsewhere. Lows to the north there in the 25-degree range for the Brooks Range, and otherwise in the 30s most everywhere else. Highs 40s, but upper 30s from the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, and lows mid-20s there. North Slope, Brooks Range, and 30 to 35 eastern interior, lower 40s out to the west, followed by highs in the upper 40s to lower 50s, but chillier north of the Brooks Range. 40s for the lows out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, southwest coast, and highs in the 50s. Some areas in the upper 40s. And for the lows again on Friday morning, lower 40s most places, mid 40s in the Aleutians, and lower 40s for Bristol Bay, followed by highs, lower 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, mid 50s in the Aleutians, near 50 for the Pribilofs.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
All right, on to flying weather. Thursday morning, best conditions seem to be from the Gulf of Alaska across Prince William Sound and into the Susitna Valley, central interior, and then off to the western Arctic coast with VFR or IFR to the east and northeast and IFR to the west and southwest, all the way out to the Pribilofs and some scattered areas IFR, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, a little more solid into the southwest interior. And northern panhandle all the way down to Dixon Entrance, and then marginal VFR over the central areas out to the coast. And pretty good over the western Aleutians, southwest Bering Sea. And then for the afternoon, we've got, improving conditions as far as losing the IFR in the interior, but still a fair amount of marginal VFR, but pretty good up in the central interior. Areas of the North Slope, western Arctic coast with IFR for the central and eastern Arctic coast. IFR up along the North Gulf Coast range there into western Prince William Sound and on down to Resurrection Bay along the also IFR eastern slopes of the western Alaska range, improving over the southern panhandle, becoming VFR, and then IFR holding on for areas to the north. VFR for the Pribilofs in the afternoon and the Fox Islands. And the Aleutians, not too bad, that area of IFR, mostly north of the area there. And then for the day on Friday, IFR pretty well entrenched from the Brooks Range in the central and eastern North Slope, eastern Beaufort Sea coast there. A little bit better out toward the western Arctic coast. South of the Brooks Range, areas of VFR, all the way down to the Alaska Range. And then IFR there across the Matanuska Valley, Talkeetnas, and on down into Turnagain Arm, there into the Kenai Peninsula, eastward along the Coast Range, southern Copper River Basin, Yakutat, northern and eastern Panhandle, but VFR breaking out for the Susitna Valley, and on down Cook Inlet, some areas of marginal VFR for Kodiak Island, and also areas of marginal VFR out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And for Friday afternoon, IFR, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and along the central Brooks Range, otherwise marginal mostly for the North Slope. Some areas of pretty good VFR south of the Brooks Range into the central interior. And then IFR still holding there over the east central Alaska Range down across the Talkeetnas, part of the Matanuska Valley, North Gulf Coast Range into the Wrangels. And then also extending across near Yakutat and the northern and eastern southeast coast once again. And marginal VFR for the Bering Sea, scattered areas of VFR out there as well. Same thing for Kodiak Island. And some IFR trying to work back up into the western Aleutians, but not quite making it, at least through Friday afternoon. Passes, both Anatufik and Adigan, occasionally marginal tomorrow. And for the Lake Clark and Merrill passes, IFR especially on the eastern entrance of both passes. Same thing for Rainy, IFR, lowest conditions, eastern approach, a little bit better out to the west. Windy, VFR, north entrance, otherwise marginal. And Isabel, marginal VFR, better on the north entrance. And same forecast for Mentasta, north side seeing the best conditions, marginal VFR through the pass to the south. And Tanita looks occasionally to mostly marginal. Portage, IFR a good bet for the day Thursday, and Chilkoot and White, IFR. And for the freezing levels, 2,000 feet to up over the northern part of the state, but that extends down over the western Alaska Range. 4,000 feet down into northeast Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, over to Yakutat, and then about 8 to 12,000 feet across the Aleutians, 6 to 10,000 feet over the Panhandle. Icing, areas of isolated moderate rime icing above about 7,000 feet. Could happen anywhere in the shaded area, but doesn't mean it will happen, but that's the best potential for it. Looks like the best locations would be the Aleutians and the North Slope and Brooks Range, pretty much icing free up there. And for the jet stream, a little bit farther south, southern Bering Sea westerlies, 110, 120 knots, diminishing to 95 knots, crossing the Alaska Peninsula and blowing on in to the southern Panhandle, but pretty light there. Most of mainland Alaska now on the north side of the jet, the cool side. And 9,000 feet, westerlies, west-northwest, 45 to 65 knots out west, and south 35 coming up across the Copper River Basin. 3,000 feet, 40 knot southerlies right up to the North Gulf Coast, and west-northwest 40 knots across the Bering Sea up to 50 knots toward Chimay-Attu. Considerable moderate chop up over the northwest coast, Noaa Valley, and the southern Copper River Basin, Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula.
On March 11, 2011, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake off the Pacific coast of Japan generated a tsunami. This series of ocean waves sped towards the island nation, with waves reaching 24 feet high. The result was devastation and utter destruction. Towns were engulfed by water and swept away. Farmland was flooded. Tens of thousands of lives were lost. The National Police Agency reported damages to hundreds of roads, bridges, and more than 100,000 buildings. The surging water flooded rivers and destroyed harbors. In some areas along the coast, tsunami waves reached 6 miles inland. Tsunamis not only cause severe damage when they first strike land, but also as the water recedes back to sea. Tsunamis can inflict this type of damage because of some unique features. As tsunami waves travel across ocean basins, they may be as little as a few centimeters high, but they extend down to the ocean floor. This is different than traditional waves, which are only surface features. Tsunamis can also travel hundreds of miles per hour in the open ocean. As these waves approach a coast, the shallowing ocean floor slows the waves down and pushes the water mass upwards. The quicker the ocean floor transitions from deep to shallow, the greater potential for a higher wave height. So, tsunamis that experience this sudden shift into shallow water can have the height and momentum to pack a serious punch. Unfortunately, Japan found itself in this scenario. This image shows how abruptly the Japanese islands rise out of the ocean. Other coastal areas in the region have much more gradual slopes. The earthquake on March 11th was the most powerful known to hit Japan, and the tsunami it created had the necessary ingredients to make it such a deadly and destructive force. "80 miles east of Japan, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake rocks the ocean floor. This disturbance causes a transfer of energy from the seafloor to the ocean, generating a series of ocean waves, known as a tsunami. In about 20 minutes, waves strike the Japanese coastline. Other nations go on high alert because the tsunami will propagate or spread throughout the Pacific Ocean. As the tsunami radiates outward from Japan, it encounters a variety of ocean features, such as ridges and underwater volcanoes, which guide the tsunami and create a complex pattern of scattering and reflective waves. In 8 hours, the waves reach the Hawaiian Islands, and in 9.5 hours, they hit the west coast of the United States. In 16 hours, the tsunami reaches the Indian Ocean and New Zealand, and by 22 hours, the entire Pacific Ocean had been affected. The impact of a tsunami can be highly variable because of the complicated interactions with ocean features and coastline elements. Wave height and speed will differ from place to place. Since tsunamis can be hundreds of miles long and travel thousands of miles away from where they originated, they are considered a worldwide threat when they form. These are the sounds of a tsunami warning. They alert residents that a killer wave is about to strike. These sirens, however, are just a small part of the sophisticated warning systems that played a role in Japan and in the US during the Pacific Ocean tsunami in March 2011. Most tsunamis are generated by an undersea earthquake. Fortunately, Japan has one of the most advanced earthquake early warning systems in the world. It detects tremors, calculates the epicenter, and sends out warnings from over 1,000 seismographs scattered throughout the country. The Japan Meteorological Agency issues the warnings and sends alerts to television and radio channels, the internet, and mobile phone networks. When the earthquake struck 80 miles offshore, warnings were generated in about 3 seconds. The tsunami warnings came 3 minutes later. These take longer because more complex calculations are involved and must factor in ocean data. Since the first tsunami wave struck the coastline within 20 minutes, the advanced warning provided some residents with crucial minutes to reach a safe area. While the earthquake sent powerful tsunami waves westward toward Japan, the tsunami also propagated east into the Pacific Ocean. Here, warnings are issued by the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, operated by NOAA in Hawaii. NOAA maintains a large network of buoys with ocean floor sensors that are strategically positioned in the earthquake-prone zones of the Pacific. This system collects vital ocean data for tsunami forecasting. On March 11th, only 25 minutes after the earthquake struck, the first buoy station measured the tsunami and relayed information to Hawaii. Scientists used this data to run models and issue forecasts and warnings to nations throughout the Pacific. From there, local emergency managers decided what actions were appropriate to take for public safety. The earthquake and resulting tsunami devastated the Japanese coastline, causing damage that will take years to repair. While we can't prevent these forces of nature from happening, our early warning systems can help us prepare for the dangers headed our way.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And on to the marine forecast for the central and south coast for Thursday. West winds 20 knots, seas 8 to 10 feet. The north coast, southwest winds 20 knots. Lincoln Glacier Bay, a little breezier there, a small craft advisory. South winds 25 knots with higher gusts, seas around 5 feet. Stevens Passage, south winds at 20. And for Clarence Strait, light northwest winds, 10 knots or so. And for the day Friday, we're looking at increase in the winds there. Some gales up along the north coast from the southwest, 35 to 40 knots. For the central coast, southwest winds 30 knots, seas at about 13 feet. And the south coast, small craft advisory, south winds at 30 knots. Central and southern inner channels, 25 knot southeast winds with 5-foot seas, southeast at 20. For Lynn Canal, seas 4 feet. And for Prince William Sound on Thursday, east winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. For the North Gulf Coast, southwest winds 20 knots. Barren Island, south winds at 20 knots. Kamishak Bay, northeast winds at 15, and south winds 15 knots for Cook Inlet. Outlook for Friday, Cook Inlet, south winds 10 to 20 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas. West winds at 20 knots for Kamishak Bay. And for the Barren Islands and western North Gulf Coast, west winds 25 knots. And for the eastern North Gulf Coast, southwest winds at 25 knots with 11-foot seas. Prince William Sound, west winds at 15. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 30 knots for Thursday, seas up to 11 feet. And for the Alaska Peninsula, west winds 25 knots, seas 10 feet. West winds at 20 knots for Bristol Bay with seas running 6 feet. And Friday, Bristol Bay, southwest winds at 20 knots, seas up to 7 feet. And for the Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest 25-knot winds in the forecast there, seas around 12 feet. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. And for the eastern and central Aleutians, west winds 25 knots, seas 9 to 11 feet. And from Kiska to Shemya, west winds 30 knots, seas 10 to 14 feet. And the outlook for Friday, for the western Aleutians, small craft advisories, west winds 30 knots, seas 14 to 16 feet. Gale warnings for Adak, Atka, and Unimak Island, looking at west winds Friday at 35 knots with seas 13 to 19 feet. For Unalaska Island, small craft advisories, west winds 30 knots, seas 13 to 16 feet. And up along the Southwest coast for tomorrow, west winds 25 knots, seas around 8 feet. West winds 25 knots for the Perbolofs, but seas up to 12 feet there. On St. Matthew Island, west at 30, seas 15 feet. St. Lawrence Island, southwest winds 20 knots, seas 10 feet. And for Norton Sound, south at 25. Then much lighter winds in store for Friday for these areas. Norton Sound southwest at 10, St. Lawrence Island south at 10 knots. East winds 15 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, Kuskokwim Delta coast south at 20. Pribilofs and St. Matthew Island, small craft advisories for northwest winds at 25 knots. For the eastern Boulevard Sea coast on Thursday, east winds 15 to 20 knots. Then small craft advisories for the central and western coastline there, east winds 25 knots. And 30-knot winds from the east and southeast from Cape Beaufort to Wales with seas just under 10 feet. And then for Friday, east-northeast winds 20 to 25 knots from Wales to Cape Beaufort. And for the central and western Arctic coast, east winds 25 knots, eastern Boulevard Sea coast, east winds at 20 knots with seas running about 4 feet. And for tonight, front weakens as it moves inland, so areas of light rain will push farther east, at least into the Kuskokwim Valley and across Bristol Bay to southwest Kodiak Island. Winds will diminish, stays pretty brisk though, bearing straight to the northwest coast areas. And a high surf advisory is out for St. Lawrence Island, bearing straight in the northwest coast through tonight for possible beach erosion. And a flood watch continues tonight until 4 a.m. Thursday for the Copper River Basin for possible flooding, but rain will start diminishing with the front weakening and pushing into the northern panhandle, increasing the clouds, but dry conditions stay to the south. And then another front pushes up into the Gulf, a warm front, and chance of showers southern panhandle, increasing rain late in the day for the North Gulf Coast, kind of showery with low snowfall levels over the interior, and that front really weakens, but westerly flow will keep it pretty wet and unsettled over the west coast, eastern Bering Sea. And then that big low over the just southwest of Nunivak Island on Friday. Look for areas of rain and gusty winds around that, especially to the west and south, and the front pushes a good shot of rain into the panhandle in the afternoon Friday. Thanks for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.